I grew up in an immigrant community in southwest London, and the thing that all the families there had in common, and it was a tight knit community, lots of Spaniards, Italians, Maltese people, West Indians. It was a wonderful time and a wonderful place to grow up in, and more often than not, it was only the kids who spoke English. The thing that most of those families, my own included, had in common was that we were all living in bedsits originally, and sometimes the families would all sleep in the same room. Sometimes, you'd get kids who were lucky enough to be sharing with a little brother or little sister, and eventually they'd all move to a bigger house. All the kids would have their own rooms. That never happened with us. We, when I was four, moved from one bedsit to another, and we're all sleeping in the same room until I was 17. Very unusual. My dad was like one of those, promising young footballers of whom much is expected but doesn't really train on, doesn't fulfill his promise. And, he would say, well, maybe this is why English kids are so distant from their families. They've all got their own rooms, they keep to themselves. Everyone's living separate lives. And in a sense, I could see his angle. I'd call round for English friends. I'd ring the bell. The mum or dad would come down and they would say, well, I don't know if they're in. Actually, let me have a look. And I'm thinking, how do you not know if your son is in? How strange is this? So I'd wait outside and wait for their parent to come back and tell me if my friend was in. Then I'd step inside if they were in, and I'd go home to our bedsit. And I was envious of this. I was envious of the fact that my friends had parents who didn't really know if they were in or not. So my friends would call round for me. And, we lived in it was like a really crap TARDIS. It was small on the outside, but even smaller on the inside. And, friends would call round and I'd say to my mum, just tell them I'm not in. Or just pretend you don't know if I'm in or not. And so my mum would play along and my friends would be out there thinking, well, what's going on? We know it's a bedsit. How can you not know if your son is in? So it was unusual. I don't think as I was growing up that I ever thought too much about it. It's only much later that I did. I just got on with it until I was 13, 14, and suddenly sleeping became a problem. I'd been known for being a good sleeper up until that point, and ever since then I've been something of an insomniac. I suppose the most difficult part of this bedsit era was when my parents separated, when the marriage finally broke down. And there was something of a reshuffle, which involved me swapping beds with my mum. She moved to take my lower bunk. I moved across to the marital bed with my dad, which coincided with my taking my GCSEs. Two very strange years, and my dad would wonder why I failed my GCSEs, and he'd ask, why have you not got a girlfriend? Where's your girlfriend? And I'd be, I'm in bed with you every night. What do you expect me to be able to do here? Then in the glorious summer of '89, which I suppose was our age of enlightenment, that year we finally got a big TV. That was a very exciting day. I got my own Z bed, which would be my bed for the next 11 years. My dad countered that because I don't know whether he held a grudge against me for deciding that I would sleep in the front room or not, because he countered with a 12-foot cloak rail, which was really strange. He was obsessed with space, with storage, because we didn't have much space. And what else? The VHS recorder. I'd always wanted a VHS recorder. My dad wouldn't take us to the cinema, and I'd spent the '80s really wanting a VHS recorder. But the thing I wanted most of all wouldn't come for another year, the telephone. But that's another story. I'll save that for another Writer's Life post. So the Z bed came in September '89. I would spend the next 10 and a half years, actually longer, 11 years, putting that together every night. And, not quite as strange as sharing the marital bed with a parent, but still strange, because some nights I'd be going to bed, going into my fold-up bed, and, a member of the family would still be in there watching TV. My dad, I had to record Italian 90 for him. He was working, he'd be back home late. So he'd be watching the games a couple of hours after they'd finished, and I'd be trying to get to sleep. Strange times. The irony for me is it's not been lost on me that at the top of our road, the road I grew up on, some years after I finally moved away after 24 years in that bedsit, a massive bed showroom opened. And, I walk past there and I see some of the beds that I, even now, probably will never have, some incredible beds. And I think if only these people knew, if only this company knew that just down the road, 30 seconds from here, every night for 11 years, some kid was putting together a bed every night just to sleep away from the rest of the family, which I think I was entitled to do. But I think beds are probably the reason why I was such a late developer when it came to everything, really. It's not a normal way to grow up, I think.